in which we look to find the answer. Okay? And with that brief introduction, we will start talking about, in particular, three classes of growth models. Very briefly, I should dwell on the Harry-Gilmore model, which is one of the earliest models of economic growth. And today, we will look at the solo growth model, which is also known as the new classical growth model. So if you're reading some paper and you find a reference to a new classical growth model, then they're actually talking about the solo growth model. It's a very, very influential model of economic growth, enough for it to be referred to as the new classical model of growth. So that's exactly what we'll be looking at today, the solo model in detail. We'll set up the model, we'll examine certain properties of the model, and the next lecture I will be looking at an alternative to the new classical growth model, which was developed not too long ago, in the 1980s, and that's going to be the topic for next time. Okay. Now, so this is the plan of how we're going to look at the solo model in detail. We look at the solo steady state, and it will be clear what I mean by steady state when I talk about it and explain it. So we look at two flavors of the solo model, if you like, with and without technological progress. Okay? And finally, I'd like to wind up by talking about a very important empirical implication of the solo model, the thesis of convergence. Okay? First of all, what does it mean to talk about convergence? And given that we do talk about it, does it exist? Okay? So that's, if you like, the plan. So let's start with the introduction. Now, how many of you seen this movie called Sound of Music? Yeah, okay. So there's a song over there, it goes Doreen, Castle, and etc. Now that has some very important lines at the beginning. Okay? It says, let's start at the very beginning, a very good place to start. So I think that's something I agree with. There's no better place to start than at the beginning. So let's ask ourselves the question, if you talk about economic growth, what is economic growth? And I would like you to what to understand by economic growth. Growth in profits, growth in sales. We're talking about a slowdown now. So that obviously means a slowdown in growth of something. So I think you all understand what growth is. So what do you think one is referring to when one talks about economic growth? That's right. So you're talking about. So I'm just going to use some abbreviations which should be clear. So this is growth in output. Okay. Now, since we're talking about economic growth and we're talking about a macroeconomic context as opposed to a microeconomic context, we are not talking about a firm or one industry. We're talking about the entire economy. And what does it mean to talk about the output of an entire economy? Okay. So that's one obvious thing that one is interested in. Growth is GDP. Anything else at the economy-wide level, is there anything else that you're interested in? Or is it growth in aggregate GDP that you're really interested in? Yes, you're really going to be interested in growth in per capita GDP. Now, can you tell me why? Why is this per capita GDP something that's more important than just looking at GDP by itself? Yes.
Taking the
among which it has to be distributed, right? So, I mean, that has certain obvious implications. So, if the size of the cake is, let's say, growing at some rate g, and we just have a little population to think about, then that obviously means the share of the cake that's potentially available to each of these, n people is large, and the share of the cake grows smaller as the population increases. Now, mind you, what I'd really like to remind you at this point is that per capita GDP is only about potential, okay? It's not about the actual distribution, okay? So it just tells you what's possible, all right? Because when we are calculating, how do we calculate per capita GDP? Okay, all right. And what are we assuming when we are calculating this? Yes, we are assuming equal distribution, which may be very far from the truth. So that's exactly where the potential nature of what I'm talking about comes in. This is what's potentially available to be distributed. It is very obvious developmental connotation. So right in the introduction, this is one point I'd really like to kind of drive home, that it's not just enough to talk about growth in GDP. What's really very important is to us, what is the rate at which per capita GDP is growing? Yes.
Generally, we find, especially in our society, that the top 20%
Yeah.
earning around 80% GDP. So how can per capita GDP actually do it for how the economy?
It's not an estimate. No, it is an estimate of how fast the economy is growing, but it does not have distributional connotation. So let's, therefore, per capita GDP could actually be presenting a picture which can actually be quite misleading. So, the India growth story, for instance. Yeah, so you're then stepping from positive economics to normative economics. You're asking about things like you just said. It's better, it's good. So sometimes a value judgment comes in, Yeah, definitely. So the basic lesson I'd like you to get from here is treat a number for what it represents and don't try and stretch it beyond what it represents. So per capita GDP only tells you what's possible. It doesn't mean that's the truth. Okay? So I hope when you are looking at the India growth story, you're going to keep that in mind. Now, let's talk about, and I'm still kind of trying to motivate this discussion about growth. So having established that it's very important to not just look at growth, but look at growth in per capita income, let's now ask, how do we really understand growth, okay, at a macroeconomic level? And in that context, what is the role of saving and investing? Now, you've already looked at some pension models, okay, and I'm sure you have heard of this concept called paradox of thrift. Yes? So what is the paradox of thrift all about? Do you remember? It's something about savings, okay? If you increase savings, what happens? It's bad for the economy.
If you don't consume,
Right.
if you don't consume, there is no initiative for the producers to produce more. And as such, the overall growth liquidity.
So one way we've been looking at savings in the short run is that savings are a leakage. Savings are a leakage from the stream of aggregate demand. Okay? If you're saving more, it means you're consuming less today, which means you're demanding or spending less today. Your firms are unable to sell, and therefore, they are piling up inventories and so on. Okay? Now, one thing I'd like to stress here is the theory of economy that does not trade. Okay, so aggregate demand therefore is basically C plus I. Let's even forget that it has a government. So you underconsume, or you're investing, which means you're buying factories and construction materials and so on and so forth. Okay, so you need money for that. Now where are you going to get the money? You're going to have to borrow, and the funds that are redeemed from as saving from consumption today are precisely the funds that you're going to borrow and set up, put into investment. Okay, so savings therefore play a very fundamental role in our theory of long run growth, and we're going to use the term savings and investment interchangeably, because it's going to be understood that whatever is saved is actually invested, and it's really coming out of a very simple model of a macro economy without the government, without international trade. Now what can I say over here? All of income that is not consumed has to be saved. Right? So I subtract C from here and this goes. What do I have? Savings is equal to investment. Okay? So that's going to be one of the primary ways in which you're going to view savings in these long run models of economic growth. Okay. Well, we are kind of almost all set. Now the only other thing that I think I can stress here is the following.
When calculating per capita GDP, do you use total population or working population?
Yes, you see, you can actually have different measures of per capita GDP. You can divide by total population, that would actually give you per capita GDP. Okay, and if you divide it by the working population, that's a different measure of GDP. So obviously it's not per capita, it's per unit of the labor force you have. Okay, so every country has a labor force participation rate, which is the percentage of the population who are in the workforce, who are actually employed. So that GDP calculation can also be carried out by per capita calculation can also be carried out that way. Now you see, which one are you going to use? It depends on what kind of question you are asking. So here we are really asking like a broad developmental question, because the assumption that you're working with is that growth is good. The more you grow, the more is available to be shared amongst the entire number of among all your people, and standards of living can be increased. So in this class, I will be referring to per capita GDP as GDP divided by total population. Now, that's actually the very next thing that I was going to do. Now, sure, I told you that what's really important is growth in per capita GDP, right? So, per capita GDP can be defined as such. Now, I just made some very simple calculus to show you how we actually calculated growth. Now, are you aware? Suppose I just give you some GDP data, okay, and ask you to calculate the growth rate. How should you do it? That is okay.